So let's continue the build-up then to tomorrow's eagerly awaited judgment with my colleague Oliver Dickson, who is out in Cape Town, as well as political analyst Professor Lesiba Teffo from UNISA. Good evening to the both of you. So, Oliver, let me start with you once again. The committee of Makashule Ghana, the 31-person committee, is raring to go by all looks of things, but there's a door that seems to have been left slightly ajar by one of the paragraphs in the Constitutional Court judgment that said the panel, where the panel concludes that sufficient evidence exists to disclose a prima facie case, its recommendation that a Section 89 inquiry be proceeded with must be implemented through a referral to an impeachment committee unless and until the report is set aside on review. Those two keywords, unless and until. What are the expectations around what we're going to hear, given everything that we've heard, to try and open that door wide if you are on the side of the president, or to try and close it if you are on the opposing side?
Tulas, it's important to note that the effect, if the president were to be granted an interim interdict tomorrow at 10 a.m. when the Western Court hands down its judgment, the effect of it would be to delay the start of the impeachment committee's work by a month and some change, given that the review process is set to be heard in court on an urgent basis, by the way, in early September. Now, that would delay it until that judgment comes out. And given that it's an urgent application and an urgent process, one might assume that it would be the judgment would be delivered on an expedited basis. And so if the president finds favor in court tomorrow, it would delay it by a month and some change. And that's the argument, in fact, the president made in court over the 2 days of argument last week, where he said it's not that much of an inconvenience. The president, however, then does make the substantive argument in his review application that the Nobel panel had misdirected itself in its consideration of the limitations of what it should have done in terms of its assessment of prima facie evidence versus sufficient evidence. That, of course, is the ongoing debate that the review court will have to give due consideration to. In the last hour, I mentioned to you that the respondents in the interim interdict and in the review application matter make the argument that the Nobel panel had insufficient time to be able to do the sort of evidentiary testing that the president wants them to make. They only had 30 days as instructed by the Speaker of Parliament. And on top of that, they didn't have the resources you would otherwise expect. For instance, they couldn't subpoena and summon anyone to appear before the panel to be able to extract information from them. That had to, that which they corroborated and tested, they did so independent outside of any such powers existing. And so that was a serious limitation. Of course, the court will have to, in the review process, give due consideration to that. What the president wants to see happen here, at least, is that the review process be ventilated entirely. Now, the respondents made the argument last week in court that the president might well litigate this all the way up to the Constitutional Court if he doesn't find favor. The response we heard from Vim Trengov, senior counsel, last week in court was that no, we're not asking for an indefinite interdict. We're asking for an interdict until the review court has handed down its decision. The review court being the High Court, of course, not the Constitutional Court, given that the Constitutional Court had already dismissed the president's review application when he submitted it there right after the Nobel panel handed down its report, and the Constitutional Court then in that matter said that they had no jurisdiction and the president failed on direct access as well.
Prof Teffo, whichever way the scales of justice swing tomorrow, what's riding on this as far as the scheme of separation of powers, the whole concept of Parliament holding the executive to account, holding the president to account, as well as the president's own entitlements as far as access to the courts to have any matter that can be resolved by application of the law so resolved?
Yeah. Hello. Yeah.
Prof Teffo, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
I was asking how much is riding on this for our constitutional scheme whichever way the pendulum swings tomorrow as far as the judgment is concerned, for the various institutions, for the presidency, the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, Parliament itself?
Look, it's just being who we are as South Africans. One could ask the question, yes, if the request is that just stay the process, let's see what the review can yield and then take it forward. Is that a very complicated request to make? Is it an unreasonable request? No, don't stop the process. Just defer it for a while. Let's see what the outcome of this would be. That's fine. The second bit is that, going back to what Teffo from Teffo, my brother, then I'm saying, look, I like just to push it forward. Either way it goes, right? I don't see that day comes whereby he himself is going to sit in front of the panel of 31 people and be and lead evidence, right? That's one. Number two, if I push it further, I don't think the panel has the numbers that could lead to an agreement on the language used when the report is written. They're still divided because they tend to look at party political interests rather than national interests. Just to firm up this point, ad hoc committee on the language of the report, let alone even its substance. Now, even in this committee, I don't think those who are anti-president, and I don't think they are wrong in doing that, but I'm saying they don't have the numbers. If you take it to Parliament, I don't think they will also have the numbers. Then it's going to be worse because you want 2/3 majority. And I said yesterday, I can repeat myself, there are many ANC-like or ANC leaguers or youth leagues that are in Parliament and are in the GNU who are unlikely to turn against him.
All right. So let's pick up on that theme with you again, Oliver. Just the politics of it all, as well as the context, because there's context to everything, isn't there? How much in your recapping of the context and some of the legal developments that have led us to this point, the increasing clarity and sharpening of that clarity around the role of the National Assembly from the judgments that have gone before. What's your thinking, Oliver, around how that is shaping the experience we are having now with Parliament and this impeachment committee, and how it's approaching this, the way that the committee itself approached it versus what, for example, the Speaker of the National Assembly approached it?
Yeah, of course, that was a controversy, right, Tulas, where the Speaker of Parliament had sent to the Western Cape High Court an advisory note of sorts, an opinion of sorts, to say this is where Parliament's thinking is, or at least the thinking of the Speaker rather than that of the committee. There was the committee that intervened there on a legal basis, right? And so one can already see that there's some sort of divergence there. But the President's language in his papers was quite pointed in that especially on the fourth test of the interim interdict test, which is that there's no alternative remedy. The President makes the argument that he's engaged the committee, and his language there is quite pointed in that the chairperson of the committee, in this instance, Ghana Magashula, has misdirected himself or an application in his understanding of the statutory framework that is at play in his consideration of when the committee should begin its work and when the committee should not begin its work. Important to note, yesterday, when members of that committee had met, they couldn't reach consensus on what should be the way forward in terms of its terms of reference and the rules. Now, I've seen the draft terms of reference and the draft rules for the committee. They, in very many ways, quite reasonable compared to the impeachment committee of Vusisiwe Mkhwebane, for instance, the public protector, right? There's a great deal of similarity in terms of the spirit of how those rules have been drafted. Where they, of course, deviate is on the question of whether or not the president should and can be called to give evidence before the committee. We've ventilated what that means legally and or politically for the president. Well, like I said, a little bit later on, I'll be speaking to Vuyelwa Zungula, who's the leader of the ATM, and they're the first respondents in that interim interdict application. But it's also fascinating to then hopefully hear from him what the backdoor machinations are, particularly around parties trying to lobby each other. We know that the Patriotic Alliance, they came out in strong defense of the president, or at least quite clearly, squarely behind the ANC in that caucus divide, right? Where other parties stand, it's yet to be determined.
And Prof, let me ask you then about, just a few minutes ago you were teasing out the permutations as far as the numbers in the committee are concerned and the likely impact of that in the language of whatever report comes through, whether it be now or perhaps at a later stage, and that's a big if the president happens to be unsuccessful in his review application that's to be argued in September. Just talk to that and also talk to whether or not the win is not really in the mere fact of putting the president through this. There was that argument, I don't know if you remember, a couple of weeks ago, immediately after the Constitutional Court judgment that said, well, if you're thinking that a win is 2/3 majority and the removal of the president, you've got this thing all wrong. The win is in having the process itself and having him sitting there and fielding questions from 31 members that can go in any direction.
Yeah, I think it's almost a repeat of what I did previously, because you said, we are saying, look, let it be clear, a review is not an appeal, right? It cannot stay the judgment. So they could still go the process, the full walk, right? But it's what would be the ultimate outcome thereof that I think is pertinent in the debate. I see a political game being played here, and I see also the president using the Stalingrad strategy, right? Either way it goes tomorrow, right? And one would say, if you take Mukwebane's case as a precedent, yes, they might want to go there. There is no agreement whether in writing or he should come in person. They are still going to quibble around that. And if you were to put that to the vote again, I don't think he would not get the necessary support. I think his roles, look, he has learned fellows, boys and girls, experts like Wim Temgroot. They've analyzed the situation. They've come up with a strategy, and they understand they can appeal and appeal and appeal, take a page from Jacob Zuma until the elective conference of the ANC in 2027. And that's my argument. Only then he can pass the baton through the air. But that he can give the opposition the joy of seeing him walk away on the basis of Palapala, in my book, is very, very unlikely. Whatever it takes, whatever strategy he will invoke and he will use.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you. On that note, Professor Lesiba Teffo, there's that word again, Oliver, Stalingrad tactics at play. Thank you to the both of you, Professor Lesiba Teffo from UNISA, as well as Oliver Dickson, who is in Cape Town for us. Look out for more of Oliver's reporting as well as coverage coming in from early morning tomorrow, building up, of course, to the decision being delivered by the Western Cape Division of the High Court.